Welcome to this week's recap of Holes. Chapters 29 to 34, officially in part 2 of the book called The Last Hole. Stanley and the other boys are, out on the lake digging holes. Surprise, surprise. There's a storm off in the distance, and the boys joke about the chance of rain coming their way. Rain at Camp Green Lake? Hasn't rained in 110 years. Yeah, right. But wait, this is cool. During a lightning flash, Stanley thinks he sees a strange rock formation on the mountain peaks way off in the distance. It looks like a giant fist giving a thumbs up. We told you it was cool. Stanley thinks about his great-grandfather telling people that he found refuge on God's thumb. No one ever knew what he meant. Maybe he found refuge on that rock formation. Kind of does look like God's thumb. And refuge means safety, so maybe that's where he was hiding. Next, it's Zigzag's birthday, and Stanley wonders how long he's been at Camp Green Lake. Zero's like, 46 days! Great math skills. Later, as he digs his hole, Stanley thinks about how much he's changed since he came to camp. He's stronger, he's better at digging, he's lost weight. Oh, and Mr. Sir is finally giving him his water again, too. So much for forgiveness. Zero is still helping him to dig his holes every day in exchange for reading lessons, and the whole situation is super awkward. The other boys are getting angry about it. They tease Stanley big time, saying that he's doing Zero a favor by letting him dig his hole. And they teasingly say, "Oh, please, can I dig a hole for you too, Stanley?" Oy. Mr. Pendanski comes by with the water truck, and X-Ray makes Stanley go to the front of the line for water and says, since you're better than all of us. Oh, goodness. Bullying. After they get their lunches, Zigzag continues to harass Stanley, saying he'll trade his cookie if he gives him a chance to dig Stanley's hole. Stanley pushes the cookie away, and Zigzag pushes Stanley. Yikes. X-Ray is watching and says that Stanley should be able to take care of himself, since he's bigger than Zigzag. Stanley's relieved when he sees Mr. Pendanski approaching, but his attitude is the same as X-Ray's. He says that Stanley should go ahead and hit Zigzag back. Teach the bully a lesson, he says. Stanley tries, but he really doesn't have the heart to fight. Zigzag, on the other hand, seems eager to fight Stanley. He jumps on top of him, slamming him to the ground and punching him over and over and over again. This is when things escalate. Zero joins in and attacks Zigzag, pulling him off of Stanley and starting to choke him. Just when things look really bad, Armpit gets involved and pulls Zero away from Zigzag. And Mr. Pendanski fires his pistol into the air to signal for help. Phew. Then the other counselors and the warden arrive. But Mr. Pendanski tells them that there was a riot. How do you think that the warden's going to react to that? X-Ray tries to downplay what happened, saying that Zigzag was just short-tempered because of the heat. But Zigzag won't back up X-Ray's story. Instead, he tells the truth. He was angry because Zero has been digging Stanley's hole for him. Uh-oh. I feel like the warden is going to be mad about this. Stanley tries to explain Zero's digging for him because he's teaching Zero to read and write, and the warden asks Zero to tell them something he's learned. First, he doesn't want to say anything, but after Mr. Pendanski basically calls him stupid, he tells them all of the letters and sounds he knows. The warden quizzes him on a few things, most of which he gets right, but when he makes a wrong guess about a letter that he hasn't learned yet, all of the counselors laugh at him. Man, this poor kid, he can't catch a break. The warden says that from now on, Stanley has to dig his own stinking hole. It's all about learning a lesson. Oh, and no more reading lessons for Zero. Why? That's so mean. Then, in a moment of anger and defiance, Zero says, "I'm not digging another hole." No one really buys it. I mean, Mr. Pendanski tells Stanley that Zero's too stupid to learn to read. And he hands Zero a shovel so he can get back to digging. That's when things get really bad, guys. Zero takes the shovel and hits Mr. Pendanski across the face, knocking him unconscious. Yikes. He says that he hates digging holes, and he runs away across the lake. Wow. The search is on for Zero. The warden tells the counselors to take turns guarding the camp's water sources. He'll have to come back for water, and that's when they'll catch him. When he returns, she says, she is going to have to paint her nails again. Gulp. Poor Zero. He can't survive out on that lake bed without water. And if he goes back, the warden's going to have at him. After Zero runs away, it's business as usual, and the boys go back to digging their holes. Stanley's angry with himself, and he thinks that he should go after Zero and help the guy out. He keeps looking for his friend in the distance, but Zero's nowhere in sight. Then Stanley starts to think. If he goes after Zero, maybe they can climb up to the mountain to the Big Thumb. That might be where Stanley's great-grandfather found refuge. If so, there might be water there, too. The next day, Zero still hasn't come back to camp, and the counselors continue to guard the water sources. While he's digging, Stanley thinks about the possibility that Zero could make his way to God's Thumb and find water there from the recent storm. When Stanley gets back to the tent, Mr. Pendanski, who's looking pretty bad from his recent encounter with the shovel, Mr. Sir, and the warden are all waiting for him. Uh-oh. I hope the warden hasn't painted her fingernails. They ask if he's seen Zero or if he knows where he might have gone. He says he doesn't know anything. The warden tells Mr. Pendanski to erase all traces of Zero from the camp's records and to hack into the state files so no one in the Attorney General office will know that he was even at the camp. Huh? Turns out Zero was a ward of the state. It means he was homeless. He was living on the street when he was arrested. So no one's ever going to know he's gone if all the files are gone. No one's going to come looking for him. It's going to be like it never even happened. In a super threatening tone, Mr. Pendanski says that he can make it very difficult for anyone to find any record of Zero. Besides, he says, no one will ever look. No one cares about Hector Zeroni. 2 days later. 2 days! Oh, that was weird. Excuse me, children. Pardon me, I'm sorry this is happening. Okay, 2 days later. A new kid takes Zero's place in detent. His name is Twitch, and he was arrested for stealing cars. This is a big-time crime. This guy's not the same as the other kids who are there. He seems to be a little bit more sophisticated. Stanley keeps thinking about Zero, wondering if he made it to God's Thumb and if he's even still alive. He pictures Zero crawling around on the ground, dying of thirst. Oh, poor Stanley. He probably feels sad and guilty. I mean, I wouldn't be able to think about my best friend out there not being able to have water. The next morning, Stanley is thinking about Zero when Mr. Sir arrives in the water truck. In a moment of desperate inspiration, Stanley has the idea to steal the water truck and go out and find Zero. Wasting no time, Stanley jumps onto the truck and turns it on. He's never driven before, but with Twitch shouting some advice at him, he manages to drive it a short distance. That is until he drives straight into a hole. Oops. Stanley thinks that for once he can't blame his dirty, rotten, no-good, pig-stealing great-great-grandfather because this time it was completely his fault that things went wrong. I can't help but smile when he says this. With Mr. Sir starting after him in shock, Stanley runs off, his empty canteen slapping against his chest. Maybe Stanley should have waited to get some water before he took off. Stanley continues to run and then walk away from Camp Green Lake. No one follows him. He He doesn't think he can make it to Big Thumb, and without any water, he knows he'll have to return to camp soon. He decides to wait until everyone's had a chance to calm down a little. In the meantime, he'll look for Zero. As he walks, he keeps seeing holes. Although the farther he gets from camp, the more haphazard and random the holes seem to be. Curious indeed. Every time he passes a hole, he glances in, both hoping and not hoping to find Zero there. In one hole, he sees a family of yellow-spotted lizards looking up at him. Eek! He runs away, terrified. When he stops running, he sees something off in the distance. Turns out to be a sack of sunflower seeds with only one seed left in it. Remember, yellow-spotted lizards love sunflower seeds. Stanley keeps walking, wondering if he's already gone too far to make it back alive. He thinks he sees a pool of water in the distance, but it turns out to be a mirage. It's a fancy word for his imagination. The heat is really getting to him. After a while, he thinks he sees the shape of the mountains in the distance, and he walks towards Big Thumb. Walking along, he sees an object in the distance. It's a bit to the right of the Big Thumb, but he decides to walk towards it anyway and see what it is. When he reaches the object, he thinks he'll turn around and go back to camp. It's a plan. But as he approaches, he realizes the thing he's walking towards is an overturned boat half buried in the dirt. The boat's name is painted on its side. Mary Lou. Are you thinking what we're thinking? Stanley notices a tunnel leading underneath the boat, and he hears a noise coming from within. He shouts, hoping to scare whatever it is under the boat and keep it from coming out. He does not need another lizard encounter, that's for sure. Hey, a weak voice answers, and a hand emerges from under the boat. Well, I gotta leave it there, but I think we all know who or what is underneath that boat. Until next week, friends.